Hello, welcome to Unbelievable Tales.
A paper cup, a trembling child, and a girl who chose kindness before even learning his name. Jared Beaver didn't want love, not after what it cost him. So he turned dating into an experiment. 10 blind dates, one simple rule. His 6-year-old son comes first. No one passed. Not until Rachel Masters sat down. She didn't smile at Jared. She didn't even look at him. She crouched beside his son, wiped away a tear, and hugged him. That hug, small, instinctive, and undeserved, would undo every wall Jared built. Because this wasn't a fairy tale. There were no makeovers, no champagne, just a poor girl who showed up wet from the rain and offered comfort instead of charm. What followed wasn't scripted. It wasn't part of the plan. It was the kind of story that doesn't need roses or rings. Only crayons, silence, and the courage to stay. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The coffee was cold again. Jared didn't drink it, just held the paper cup between his palms like it might anchor him to something real. Outside the glass walls of the bistro, traffic moved like molasses, slow and uncertain in the gray drizzle of early spring. The same table, the same seat, the same empty result. Across from him, Adam sat with his legs tucked up under his chair, a crayon clutched in one hand, the tip long worn down. He wasn't drawing, though. Not anymore. Just holding the crayon like a shield. They were 6 dates in. 6 different women. All carefully chosen, screened, naturally compatible, according to the matchmaker Jared's assistant had recommended. All of them had smiled brightly, worn lipstick that matched their nails, asked polite questions. Every single one had glanced at Adam once, maybe twice. Some offered awkward greetings. One gave him a wrapped chocolate without asking Jared if he was allergic. None of them saw him. Jared's rule had been simple. Bring Adam. No explanation, no babysitters, no test. Just let him be there. If someone couldn't sit across from his son and acknowledge the person he was, then there was no point in pretending anything else could work. So far, they'd failed. Adam hadn't spoken to anyone in months. Not since the custody hearings. Not since the court psychologist labeled him emotionally withdrawn with situational mutism. Jared hated the term. His son wasn't broken. He just didn't trust anyone anymore. Jared knew the feeling. Dad, Adam had whispered 2 nights ago, curled under the blanket fort they'd built with couch cushions and a flashlight. What if I don't like any of them? Jared had hesitated. Then we leave. Even if she's really pretty? Especially if she only pretends to like you. Adam had nodded, solemn as a monk, then fallen asleep with his hand tangled in Jared's hoodie. And now, as the 7th woman approached their table, heels clicking, designer trench coat immaculate despite the drizzle, Jared felt the same hollow chill curl in his gut. She was tall, poised, and already scanning the room for him. When she spotted them, her smile widened like she'd found a sale. Adam shrank back without a sound. Jared stood briefly, enough to be polite. She reached out to shake his hand. Hi, I'm Fallon. From Evermore, right? Jared nodded. Yes. Her eyes flicked toward Adam. And this is my son, Adam. Fallon smiled, tight and brief. Cute. Is he staying the whole time? He is. Oh. The pause stretched like taut thread. That's fine. It wasn't. She sat across from Jared, placed her handbag delicately on the chair beside her, and launched into a story about a retreat in Napa Valley where her friend had met a hedge fund manager. Adam flinched at the sudden clang of cutlery nearby and clutched Jared's sleeve. Jared touched his hand under the table, steady and silent. 10 minutes later, Fallon asked if he had ever considered boarding school for Adam, just to give you both a little space. He didn't respond. He simply reached for his wallet, placed a bill on the table, and said, "Thank you for coming." Fallon blinked. "Wait, that's it." "Yes." She scoffed, stood, and walked away with a muttered, "What a waste." Jared didn't disagree. He signaled the server to clear the extra glass of wine she'd barely touched. Adam remained still, but his shoulders had slumped. Jared leaned in. "We'll go soon." Adam didn't respond. His fingers tightened around the crayon. Jared hated this, hated how it drained his son, how each meeting chipped away a little more of what little trust remained. But he had to know, was there anyone out there who saw past the name, the money, the profile? He turned toward the window and missed the moment Adam's chin trembled. The first tear slipped silently down the boy's cheek. Then another. By the time Jared looked back, Adam's face was crumpling. Not into a sob, but a silent, breathless grief only children could feel so purely. Jared reached for a napkin, heart clenched. That was when she appeared. Not like the others. She didn't arrive with a flourish or a phone in hand. She didn't look around expectantly or smooth down her coat. In fact, her coat was damp, thrifted, a little too big. Her boots had seen better winters, and her hair was pulled into a messy bun that had begun to fall loose. She paused at the entrance, checked something in her pocket, a receipt maybe, and made her way toward the table, hesitating only when she saw Adam's tear-streaked face. And then, without glancing at Jared, without introducing herself, she crouched down beside the boy. "Hey," she whispered, not too close. "Are you okay if I sit with you for a bit?" Adam blinked, startled. He didn't nod, but he didn't move away either. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a single wrapped caramel. "I always keep one for emergencies. This feels like one." Jared stared, uncertain what to say. She finally looked up at him. "You're Jared, right?" He nodded. "I'm Rachel. I think this is your table." Then, she turned back to Adam and held out the caramel. "It's soft. No nuts. You don't have to take it." Adam didn't take it. He leaned forward and wrapped his arms around her neck. Not tightly, not like family, just like a child who hadn't been met with gentleness in a very long time. Rachel froze, but only for a second. Then she hugged him back. No questions, no flinching, just a quiet, steady presence in a crowded room where everyone else had been too loud. Jared's breath caught in his chest. He'd never seen his son do that before, and in that single moment, unexpected, unrehearsed, and completely off script, something shifted in him, too. He didn't need a test. He just needed someone who would see his son first. Rachel didn't sit right away. She stayed at eye level with Adam, her knees resting lightly on the floor, the caramel still resting on her open palm like an offering, not a bribe. He didn't reach for it, but he hadn't pulled away either. And that, to her, was everything. She had no idea what kind of date she was walking into. Her roommate had signed her up for the blind date app 3 weeks ago as a joke. "Maybe someone will feed you," she'd laughed, and Rachel, half exhausted from the night shift, half starving, had accepted the match more out of curiosity than hope. The app had said nothing about kids, nothing about CEOs, just a vague description. "Quiet dad, early dinners, prefers kindness to questions." Well, That last part might have been real. Rachel finally stood and slid into the booth opposite Jared, brushing rain from her sleeves. Her coat smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and lavender, leftovers from the hospice where she worked. Her hair had come loose again, strands curling near her cheek. She didn't fix it. "Sorry I was late," she said. "There was a bus delay." "You weren't," Jared said. They sat in silence for a few seconds. Not awkward, just quiet. Adam had climbed into the booth beside her and was slowly unwrapping the caramel with clumsy fingers. He didn't speak, just kept glancing at her with wide, blinking eyes, like he was trying to decide if she was real. Rachel smiled gently but didn't try to talk to him again. When the waitress arrived, Rachel ordered soup. Nothing fancy, just something warm. Jared ordered water. Adam said nothing, but the waitress glanced between the two adults and gently set down a kid's menu with crayons anyway. As she walked away, Rachel looked at Jared. "I'm guessing this isn't how these usually go." He tilted his head. "What gave it away? The crying? Or the lack of champagne?" She chuckled softly. "The honesty." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Rachel said, "I didn't know there'd be a kid." Jared nodded. "Most don't. Is he okay?" Jared looked at his son, who was now drawing small circles in the corner of the paper placemat. "He will be. Eventually." Rachel nodded too. Then, after a moment, "If you'd like me to go, I will." "No," Jared said quickly. "Please stay." She looked at him again, this time deeper. Jared wasn't what she expected. His sweater was worn, not designer worn, but actually lived in. His posture was tired, not tense. And his eyes weren't scanning the room for exit signs. They were watching his son. All the time. Rachel leaned back slightly, folding her hands in her lap. "He's 6, almost 7. He's quiet. He's been through a lot." She didn't ask more, didn't dig, just nodded like she'd heard that story 100 times before. When the soup arrived, Rachel leaned over and signed to Adam. Slow, deliberate fingers. "Hot. Be careful." Then she said it aloud just in case. Adam didn't sign back, but he looked at her and nodded. Jared nearly dropped his spoon. "You sign?" he asked. "My job," she said. "Some of the kids at the hospice can't talk. It's just easier sometimes." Jared blinked. "What do you do?" "I'm the nighttime on-call caregiver. Mostly palliative cases. I clean, monitor vitals, talk with whoever's still awake at 3 a.m. "That sounds lonely," she offered. "Meaningful," he corrected. Rachel gave a small shrug. "Depends on the night." Adam reached across the table and picked up a red crayon. He didn't draw yet, just held it, glancing occasionally at her as if testing her weight in the room. Rachel didn't force anything. She didn't ask what he was drawing, didn't lean closer or praise him too quickly. She just dipped her spoon into her soup and blew on it. They ate in near silence. The restaurant buzzed with the soft hum of other conversations, but at their table, the air was still, peaceful. Rachel didn't ask what Jared did for a living. She didn't compliment the lighting or the cutlery. She didn't even mention the menu. She just was. And Jared didn't realize until that moment how rare that was. At one point, Adam tapped her sleeve. Slowly, hesitantly, she turned. He handed her the kids' menu. On it, a shaky drawing of 3 stick figures. One tall, one small, one in the middle with wild hair and a round smile. "Is that me?" she asked. Adam nodded. Jared held his breath. Rachel smiled, full and slow this time. Thanks. I've never looked better. Adam's mouth twitched. Not a full smile, but close. When it was time to go, Rachel reached for her coat, but paused. Thank you. For dinner. Jared stood with her. Thank you for showing up. She looked down at Adam and said softly, Thank you for letting me sit with you. Adam looked at her. Then, without saying a word, he slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded receipt. He held it out to her. Rachel took it, puzzled. She unfolded the small paper. There, written in blocky, uneven letters, was just one word. Thank you. Her breath caught. No doodle. No hearts. No effort to impress. Just a quiet truth from a boy who hadn't trusted anyone in months. He didn't smile, but he nodded. Once. And Jared knew whatever else happened, this was the moment that changed everything. Adam didn't say a word on the ride home. He didn't hum or fidget or glance out the window like he usually did. He just sat quietly in the back seat with his hands in his lap. His coat zipped all the way up to his chin. Jared glanced at him in the rearview mirror, uncertain if the silence was heavy or healing. When they pulled into the driveway, Adam didn't need prompting. He unbuckled his seatbelt, grabbed his backpack, and waited by the front door until Jared opened it. Then he walked straight to the couch, curled up with a blanket, and closed his eyes. Not asleep, just still. Jared watched him for a long time from the kitchen doorway. There were no tantrums, no anxious pacing, no restless sighs, just stillness. It scared Jared more than he expected. He wanted to ask questions, wanted to know what Adam felt, what he thought of Rachel, if he wanted to see her again. But he didn't want to rupture something so fragile. So instead, he made tea he didn't drink and turned off the lights a little earlier than usual. In the morning, Adam was up before the alarm. He ate breakfast every bite. He tied his own shoes. He put a red crayon in his coat pocket. And Jared watched, heart thudding, as Adam walked to the door and paused, his fingers on the handle. You liked her, Jared said softly. Adam didn't turn. He just nodded, then pulled something from his pocket, a napkin, slightly wrinkled, and handed it to Jared. On it, in small block letters, were two words, Rachel Masters. Jared blinked. How do you know her name? Adam tapped his temple, then pointed to his ear. Jared stared at him. You heard it. Another nod. At the restaurant, when the hostess announced her. When the waitress repeated it while clearing plates. Adam had noticed, listened, remembered, and Jared stood there, napkin in hand, unable to speak, because his son, who hadn't said a single word to a stranger in months, had not only connected with someone, he'd paid attention, remembered her, wanted her back. Jared pulled out his phone that afternoon. He didn't have a last name to search with, he did now. No social media, no LinkedIn, no obvious digital footprint, but a few clicks into a volunteer registry connected to a hospice program. And there she was, Rachel Masters, listed under night shift caregivers. No photo, just a name and a contact form that led nowhere. Still, it was enough. The hospice was downtown, tucked between a pawn shop and a rundown laundromat. The kind of place people didn't visit unless they had to. Jared parked across the street, his car out of place among faded hatchbacks and delivery vans. He sat there for 10 minutes and didn't get out. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he didn't want to intrude. Maybe he didn't know what he'd say. Or maybe part of him was afraid that the moment would be too small once revisited. But the truth was, Rachel didn't feel like a memory. She felt like a thread he hadn't finished pulling. That evening, Adam fell asleep earlier than usual. No tossing, no whispered questions, no restlessness. He just curled up on the couch in his coat, cheeks flushed, hands tucked beneath his chin, and slept. Jared stood in the doorway with a cooling cup of tea, watching his son. He couldn't remember the last time Adam had looked this peaceful, not happy, not smiling, but softer, lighter, like something inside him had unclenched, even if only a little. And Jared knew the reason. Rachel. Not because she had done something grand, but because she hadn't forced anything. She hadn't broken the moment. She had simply been there. And somehow that had been enough. Jared let out a quiet breath. And the next morning he went to find her. The second time he saw her, she was crouched beside a frail man's wheelchair, tucking a blanket around his knees. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and old soap, the kind of quiet that echoed more than it settled. She didn't look up right away. She was humming softly, off-key but warm, and the man, eyes closed, was smiling. Jared almost turned around. He felt like a trespasser, like someone stepping into a moment that didn't belong to him. But before he could move, Rachel looked up. Her face didn't register surprise, just a flicker of recognition, and then something unreadable. She stood slowly, smoothing her scrubs, her name tag crooked on her chest. "Did something happen?" she asked. Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't inviting either. Jared hesitated. "No, nothing bad. Your son's okay?" Jared nodded. "He's better, actually. Quieter." Rachel looked past him. Not toward the door. Not toward escape. Just somewhere far. "That's good," she said. Silence followed. Not heavy. Not awkward. Just still. He stepped closer. "You didn't tell me your name." She gave a soft shrug. Didn't seem important. It was to him. Her eyes shifted just slightly. "He remembered?" Jared smiled faintly. "He wrote it down. On a napkin. Gave it to me like it was treasure." Rachel blinked. He saw it then. The way her shoulders tensed. How her fingers curled ever so slightly at her sides. She wasn't used to being remembered. Not in that way. "Can I sit?" Jared asked. She gestured to a nearby bench. They sat side by side. The lights flickered slightly above them, old bulbs humming with life. "I looked you up," he admitted. She didn't flinch. Not hard to find. Actually, it was. That earned the ghost of a smile. They sat in silence again. He let it stretch this time. "Adam doesn't connect with people," Jared said finally. "Not easily. Not lately." Rachel folded her hands in her lap. "He doesn't have to. But he did. With you." A long pause. She looked at her hands, picking at the corner of her nail. "I didn't do anything," she said. "I just didn't ask him to be someone else." Jared swallowed. "That's everything." She didn't answer, didn't smile, didn't thank him. And somehow it made the moment more real. She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't shifting her posture or softening her voice. She was just sitting there, tired in wrinkled scrubs, her shoes dusty from the walk between rooms. And Jared felt more seen than in any boardroom or gala he'd ever stepped into. "You probably get this a lot," he said quietly. "But you're not what I expected." Rachel's eyebrows lifted. A blind date with a single dad? A blind date that mattered. And there it was again, that flicker in her eyes. Not a spark. Not attraction. Something deeper. Like a door slightly open. and she closed it just as quickly. "I'm not part of your world," she said simply. "You're part of his," Jared replied. "That matters more." A beat passed. Rachel stood. "I need to get back. It's Med's hour." Jared stood too. "I'll walk with you." She shook her head, not unkindly. "This place is full of stories, but mine isn't one to tell." She turned, walked away, and Jared watched her go, heart quiet, but far from still. The envelope was plain. No name on the outside, no return address. Just a smudged fingerprint and a tiny crease at the corner. Rachel found it in her locker after the night shift. First, she thought it was a memo, some note from admin. But when she opened it, a small folded sheet of paper slipped out. On it, drawn in red crayon, was a slightly lopsided bird, flapping midair above three figures. One tall, one medium, one small. And underneath, in shaky print, "Thank you for not being afraid of me." She sat down right there on the bench. It wasn't the words. It was the care behind them. The way the smallest figure in the drawing had his hand reaching out. Not held, not pulled, just open. Rachel blinked rapidly, willing herself not to cry. Not here. Not while still in her scrubs, with the scent of bleach clinging to her sleeves. She hadn't seen Jared since that quiet conversation in the hallway, and she hadn't expected to. She'd told herself it was a fluke, a strange, fleeting kindness that didn't belong in her world. But this came from a child, and children didn't lie with crayons. She hadn't meant to keep the napkin. It had come home with her by accident, folded in the same pocket as the drawing. Only now, she noticed something. In the corner, a printed logo. Rivestone Group. She didn't know what they did, but she remembered the name. And when she passed the tall glass building near the old train station, she looked up this time. By the time she walked home, the sketch was folded twice and tucked deep into her coat pocket. All day it pressed softly against her leg, like a question waiting to be answered. She didn't have an answer. That night, Mrs. Benning, a retired teacher turned patient, asked why Rachel kept touching her pocket. Rachel smiled and changed the subject. But the woman wasn't fooled. "You look like someone who's been handed a second chance," she said. "Don't fumble it." Rachel laughed. "What makes you think it's mine to fumble?" Mrs. Benning narrowed her eyes. "Because it's the ones who think they don't deserve it, who usually do." The words stayed with her. All through laundry, all through dinner prep in the shared kitchen of the halfway house she still lived in. And finally, as she lay in bed staring at the same crack in the ceiling she had stared at for months, the words settled like a whisper. What if it was her chance? The next morning, she didn't dress like someone going on a date. She wore the same boots with one scuffed toe and the coat with the too tight sleeves. But she took the sketch with her, tucked it into a book, slipped the book into her bag. And when she stood outside Jared's office, hands cold, heart louder than her breath, she wasn't sure if she'd knock. Inside, Jared was staring at a closed laptop. He hadn't gone into work mode all morning. He kept refreshing his email, checking the window, wondering why silence could be so deafening when it came from someone he barely knew. He told himself she wouldn't come. He'd scared her, or cornered her, or simply reminded her that people like him didn't belong in stories like hers. Then came a knock. One soft, one certain. He opened the door, and there she was, hair windblown, eyes uncertain, and in her hands, a book with a paper peeking out. "I didn't come here for anything," she said quickly. "Not to thank you, or ask you for favors. I know, he said. She hesitated. But I did bring something. She held out the book. He took it, opened to the page. There, tucked inside, was the sketch Adam had drawn. And next to it, in the margin of the paper, something new. Rachel's handwriting. Just one sentence. I remember him too. Jared looked up. And for the first time, she didn't look away. By the time she walked home, the sketch was folded twice and tucked deep into her coat pocket. All day it pressed softly against her leg, like a question waiting to be answered. She didn't have an answer. But the next morning, she found herself standing outside the tall glass building. The receptionist looked up. Can I help you? Rachel hesitated. I think I left something here. The woman smiled politely. Do you have an appointment? Rachel shook her head. She was about to turn away when a voice called out from the mezzanine above. Rachel! She looked up. Jared stood behind the railing, briefcase in hand, paused mid-step. His eyes widened just slightly, but it was enough. He came down slowly, not in a rush, not out of obligation, but like someone who had been waiting, just in case. When he stopped in front of her, she almost lost her nerve. Almost. But then she reached into her coat, pulled out the folded drawing, and held it out. I don't need anything from you, she said softly. I just wanted you to know. It mattered. He didn't answer, but he reached out and touched the paper. His hand grazed hers, and that was enough. The next time Rachel saw Adam, it wasn't planned. She was leaving the children's center after her evening shift when she spotted him on the sidewalk, bundled in his coat, hood up, clutching a comic book with both hands. A woman in a crisp suit walked beside him, talking into a headset, clearly not his father. Rachel hesitated, but then Adam looked up and stopped. They stared at each other. He didn't run. He didn't look away. She didn't wave. She just smiled, small, careful, hoping. And Adam walked over. He held out the comic like a shield, then flipped it open and pointed at a panel. A boy standing between two shadowy figures. And above him, a word bubble that simply read, I'm okay now. Rachel blinked. She knelt, gently placing a hand on his comic. You don't have to be okay every day, she whispered. But thank you for telling me. Adam leaned forward, quick, shy, and hugged her, just once, then turned and ran to the car waiting at the curb. That night, Jared knocked on her door. He stood there, not in a suit, but in a worn gray sweater, holding a folded paper in one hand and a takeaway coffee in the other. Rachel opened the door slowly. Hi, he said back, then paused. He asked to see you again. Her eyes widened. He did. Jared nodded. He drew something for you. I think it's a sequel. He handed her the paper. Inside was a crayon sketch, the same 3 stick figures, but this time closer together. The smallest one had a crooked smile. The tallest one had glasses. And the middle one was holding both their hands. Below it, in Adam's careful print, we're not scared anymore. Rachel's throat closed. Jared waited, then added softly, he's not the only one who's not scared anymore. She looked at him, really looked. No title, no test, no pretending, just a man, standing there, holding out a piece of himself. And this time, she reached back. She didn't move fast, didn't speak, but stepped outside, closed the door behind her, and walked beside him into the night. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe and share this story if it moved you. Let us know in the comments. Would you have stayed for the second coffee?
Bye, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.